And happy Thursday, Xavier Musketeer fans. This is your weekly Razorcast. That's Jeff Zink and Jim Reaker talking Muskie basketball on a chilly, damp, dark Cincinnati day. But we're going to lighten it up with some basketball talk. How you doing today, Jim?
Oh, pretty good. Happy February, Jeff. We move on. We march toward March in the college basketball season.
That's right. It's just a month away as we start our first cast of February here, and something we'll talk about in a little bit is we're hoping that this February is not the same as last year's February. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about that St. John's game. I'm sure that if you were watching, you, like a lot of Xavier fans, were a little bit worried that we went into NYC and kind of got snared by the Redmen.
Well, you know what they say, Jeff. A win is a win is a win, and you take the win and you get out of there. The platitudes are great. Don't tell me that you weren't throwing things at the screen when it was 67-67 with just a minute left. No, I didn't, but I can tell you a phrase that I used a few times during the evening, and most of the time it was directed at J.P. McCura or Najee Marshall. It was, what are you doing? Because look at probably the thing that allowed that game to be closer than it should have been was, and we've talked about it before, something that Musketeers have improved on and I think can overcome. It's not going to be a problem like it was last year all the time, and that's turnovers. Had 16 turnovers, which is way too high. We always talk about that double-digit, trying to keep it around 10. But when you look inside the turnovers, J.P. McCura, maybe one of the worst games he's played all year, definitely overall, had 6 of those, and Najee Marshall had 4. And, again, a couple of them, McCura, it's just like, what are you doing? When he looked like he just threw it to the other team or took off on a drive and dribbled it off his foot. So, don't worry about JP. He's kind of that's the way he is. You take the good with the bad. We were talking about him a couple weeks ago in the game he had at Seton Hall where he had some unbelievable plays, a steal, a dunk, and this and that. So JP will be okay, but and we survived it. The other positive, if I move to the positives, I'll say is here was a situation you like to look at under 2 minutes, around a minute, game in the balance, and the Musketeers make the plays when they need to make the plays, made 3 stops in a row on the Johnnies and came up with something on the offensive end in order to salt that game away. Other thing was the free throw shooting at the end. Free throw shooting has not been it was off the charts at the beginning of the season. They were in the top 5, I think, in the country. It's still there. I think somebody said they were 22nd in the country right now. But the key is hitting them down the stretch and, again, keeping the ball in the hands of those guys, Quentin Good and Trey Blewett, J.P. McCura, that we know can knock them down at the end of the game.
Yeah, an ugly win is still a win. It's a tough one. Blewett and McCura are both off their game on the same night. But unfortunately, it's one of those things that if we run into a game like this in March, it could be the end of the season. So let's be glad that we played that against a team that hasn't won in 2018 yet, but still a dangerous team. And part of those turnovers, Jim, come from the pressure that Chris Mullen gets his guys to go. And before we move on, we've got to get a shout-out to Samari Pond, who had, I think it was a career-high 31. Fantastic. Played all 40 minutes, 12 for 20. He's one of the stars up there. And this was a team that I touted as probably being a little more dangerous in the Big East, and now they're at the bottom. They're winless in the Big East, but that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. They've got some tools up there, and part of those turnovers come from, like I said, that high-pressure defense that they got. And I think that was also part of the reason for our poor three-point shooting overall with a lot of the guys, especially Trevon, 1 for 9, JP 1 for 6, that they put a little more pressure out there at the 3 arc than do a lot of teams.
Yeah, you have to agree with that. And, the Johnnies are 0-11 in the Big East. And, in fact, they said on the broadcast that they have never, and, of course, they've been in the Big East since its inception, never gone over in the Big East, and I would take the bet that I don't think it's going to happen this year either. In fact, I believe they are going to surprise a couple teams. They got to win. They got too much talent. They play too well. I think 8 of their 11 losses in the Big East have been under 10 points, and that's against some of the top. Xavier 5 and 6 in their 2 games. I think they lost to Villanova by 7. They are going to they're going to beat somebody. They actually play Duke in a non-conference game on Saturday, and wouldn't totally surprise me if they beat them.
It would totally surprise me, but that's okay. When you go into New York City, it's always tough, and that's what the St. John's does. They get to you, but. Not a lot going on this week, as we talked in last week's ReakerCast. A bit of a break. Got through that one. We'll talk about Georgetown and Butler coming up here. But before we get to that, let's reflect a little bit. Start of February, where we are this year versus last year. Right now, sitting at 20-3, number 6 in the country. And last January, we talked a lot about how ugly February was, and February was ugly. Had those 6 losses in a row, but the Muskies really didn't have all that great of a January last year. They lost 3 in a row, of course, all to ranked teams, and they lost 3 out of 4 there in a stretch. Again, with the Villanova, Butler, Creighton, and then they had the Crosstown Showdown, Shootout, Chili Classic, whatever they were calling it that year, with Cincinnati, which they also lost last year. So give us a little rundown on what's the difference in a team that's 20-3 this year that was 15-6 last year, and the prognosis for hopefully a much better February.
Well, I think this team is more balanced. Again, going back to the St. John's game, even though McCura and Blewett didn't have great games, Karam Cantor, a pretty good game scoring inside. Kaiser Gates came up with a big bucket near the end of the game. Quentin Gooden, there's a positive you got to look at. Quentin Gooden, 2 for 3 from the 3-point line. He had been so bad that you had teams just almost daring him to shoot that, backing off of him because he's such a great driver. But what a weapon he will be if he can continue to hit those open 3-point plays and having to have the defenders play a little bit more up on him, then that makes his quickness to the bucket even more dangerous. But, yeah, look at last year, right at the end of January, kind of compare, we'd gone to St. John's and just beaten the Johnnies, which left us at 15-6. And, of course, just coming off of a bad stretch of losing 3 out of 4. And we were 5-3 in the Big East. But if you remember that visit to New York last year, right at the end of February, maybe the most influential thing that changed the whole season to a point was that's when Edmund Sumner, of course, tore his ACL, and he was gone for the rest of the season. And, of course, that led to a February that we really had to suffer through. Remember the 6 straight losses. Not only was Sumner gone, but Blewett was sidelined for a few games with bum shoulder. The Musketeers, again, it was almost, they were on the brink, or the bubble, as they call it in college basketball, maybe not making the tournament. Ended up with a couple wins at the end to get in, and then, of course, the great run. But so things are a lot better, but it also makes you think that, there's still a long way to go in this regular season, and anything can happen, and you hope that the injury bug stays away. They've been pretty fortunate, although they've had a few dinks and nicks here and there where a couple players have had to sit down for a few games, but they've weathered through that. This year almost feels more like 2015 and 16. I go back another year. At the end of January in 2015-16, in 2016, they were actually 19-2 and 7-2 in the Big East. And, of course, we remember that they beat Villanova in February to knock them off as the number 1 team in the country. But then we also remember that team only made it to the second round of the NCAA and got knocked off by the Wisconsin Badgers. So, again, this story has a lot to be told yet. We got February to go through. The Musketeers pretty much got to play every Big East team again, although they've already finished their series with Marquette and St. John's, and you like the fact that they swept both of those. But, again, we got, we still got Villanova, Seton Hall, Providence, Creighton, to play again, and hopefully the Musketeers can just get better every day. But again, the key is, I think, their depth. And, they're going 9 deep, basically. And, again, hopefully that'll lead them to being more rested near the end of the season and be able to play some of their best basketball. The other factor, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, they were coming off a 6-day layoff. And maybe that had a little bit to do with it. The other thing is they were playing in the on-campus site instead of Madison Square Arena.
Madison Square
Gardens. Thank you. And I think sometimes the shooting background might have an effect there. That's more like a high school gym where you got a wall not too far behind where it's not as big and open like they're used to playing in. I don't know. Was that a factor? Who knows? But, again, I like where we are, but I would like to see this team, and I think they still have a great chance to bring home that Big East championship, the first in program history.
Well, you bring up a couple of good points. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise, not for Edmond, but for the team, that when he went down, and he was our one of the big scoring threats and ran the offense end, that it gave Quentin Gooden that time last season, and you mentioned him earlier and how well he's doing right now. So that helped with that spate of games. And the other thing you mentioned, which is crucial, and we've hopefully going to say tied to that, is the injuries. We haven't had any major injuries. Trevon Blewett was beat up a little earlier in the year. He seems to be back. Nobody else has really gone down, and that's helped the depth. That's what hurt it before. But you also bring up a very key point, and we'll talk more about this next week, is we're coming to that spate of games, which is probably our toughest stretch, at Butler, at Creighton, hosting Seton Hall, and hosting Villanova. We'll talk about that more when we go through. But that's the spate that we got to get through. I'm with you. I can't see this team losing 6 in a row like it did last year in February. But hopefully, I'm with you that they can go the opposite way and get a run. Right now, they're just a game in back of Villanova, and of course, if they can beat them, that'll even it up when it comes to it. And hopefully, somebody else can get to Nova. As you've mentioned many times, they have a tough spate of away games coming up as they go. Let's talk about the next opponent then, if you're ready. It's Georgetown. It's Saturday. Luckily, it's not an afternoon game. It's an early evening game. Patrick Ewing's got them playing. They're at 13-8, I think I saw. 3-7 in the conference, but they've just beat St. John's in DePaul, and of course lost to DePaul. So I don't think they're quite there yet. But it's one of those games that you should win. Everybody expects you to win, but you can't look ahead because they've got the travel to Butler on Tuesday. So what's going on with the Hoyas?
Well, I think they're a team that the Musketeers match up with a lot better. Their leading scorer, I believe, is Jesse Govan. I remember what he's scoring in double digits, maybe 14, 16 points a game. Big guy in the middle, but I think we do a little bit better against those teams. We have the three-headed monster, the Karam Kanter, Sean O'Mara, Tyreek Jones, that we can throw at him. And again, we're very, very deep at that position. I think that gives us a key advantage. You don't have one guy playing 30 minutes like Govan will probably play, and so we should have the advantage there. And I think Patrick Ewing's got them going in the right direction, but again, factors of a great matchup and the game being at home. And again, this has got to be. I've been every season to the Cintas Center. This has got to be on track to break the mark. It seems like almost every game has been a sellout this year. Even some of the games you wouldn't even think were a sellout, like the St. John's and some of the non-conference opponents, not big names. So I think the Cintas Center, as we've talked about before, I think is the 5th-ranked toughest place to play in America in college basketball. So I think the Musketeers will prevail. Again, nothing's going to be easy, and you like that. You like the fact that there are no pushovers in the league, and you got to bring it every game, because I think almost like every other college basketball team right now, they look at February as trying to become consistent. trying to come out every day and giving your best game and work on the things that are, weaknesses for you, like for the Musketeers, defense sometimes against certain teams and turnovers. Hopefully they can continue to string together games of positive results in those areas. So, it looks good for the Musketeers, but again, in the Big East, you never know. They're going to be a formidable opponent.
Yeah, they are, and we got one more coming ahead. We took care of the Butler Bulldogs when they came here to Cintas, but going to Hinkle is a different story. Now, this is a team that swept us last year, and as the revenge tour continues, we'd like to put another one on them. They were playing really hot early in the year and doing well, but they've, with Chris Holtman leaving and Lavelle Jordan coming in, maybe the transition isn't all that great. They hit a spate where they, lost 3 out of 4 like we did last January. They've gotten themselves back on track, and they have DePaul before they come into us. So the Bulldogs are dangerous, but this might not be the same, Bulldogs that we've had in the past.
Well, 2 things concern me about that game. Number one, they are playing very, very well, although they played St. John's at home last Saturday, beat them by 25 points. I think it was 70-45. Mm-hmm. And then just last night they went to Milwaukee and put it on Marquette. I don't know what the final score was because I quit watching it because it was so out of control. They were up by well over 20 points. Andrew Rousey was having a horrible night, couldn't even find the rim. So they are playing very, very well. The other factor is going to Hinkle Fieldhouse. Again, that's a very tough place to play. The positive is this is looking at the last real road trip, so to speak, for the Musketeers. But Butler being so close, I'm sure that's just a 2-hour bus ride over there, and then they'll be back that night. And so I think that then they have to fly out to Omaha, Nebraska for the weekend game. So it's not like they're going to have 2 major trips back to back, which I think wears teams down at this time of year. So the positive, I'm sure they'll probably bus over to Indianapolis early that morning and do their shoot around and walk through, and as soon as that game's over, make the 2-hour ride back and be back on campus and in their own beds. So, that's going to be a tough game. Again, that's a different atmosphere. Old building, one of the iconic buildings of college basketball, but I think offers a much different shooting background there in that building. I don't know if you've ever been in Hinkle Fieldhouse, but actually they changed the direction of the court. It used to run the other 2 ways, and I don't know when they did that. It's been, I think, in the 1960s, but you got that crowd is really, really close down on those ends, and again, that shooting background is a little bit different than the other major arenas that they play in. So, then again, a good team, so hopefully they can come off that. And then, of course, we get to return home for the Seton Hall, which I'm sure will be seeking revenge after us beating them out there. And Villanova, of course, and you kind of hope, you almost hope that, I'm kind of torn. I kind of hope every time that the Wildcats play that they lose, that would get the Musketeers back in a tie and losses with them with 2. But then you almost think, well, it'd be great if they were still ranked number 1 when they came here, and what the attention would be a number 1 versus whatever the Musketeers might be at that time, hopefully still in the top 10, the national attention that would bring to the university. So,
no, I don't want them at their best. I want them at number 1. I mean, remember last time that we played them, Butler had just beat them, at home, and of course they had a Marquette game in between there, but they came in ready to get a point. I want them right there where we can knock them off the pedestal like we did a couple of years ago. We still wouldn't need somebody to beat them to win the outright Big East, but I would love for that to be a game between number 1 and Xavier somewhere in the top 5. That would be a great game for the Big East. Yeah, it would. And again, last night when I was watching Butler and Marquette, those announcers, kept saying, they didn't think the Big East, even though they had the number 1 team in the country, that the Big East gets the attention and the recognition that they should. A lot of times people talk about the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC, and they felt that the Big East
gets should get more attention than they do because they're so deep and so talented and have been for the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, that brings us to another topic that we're going to talk about on our broadcast the other day. You brought up, Pete Gillen, and Pete Gillen was just in town for the UC game and touted them and their abilities. He's been doing CBS games for quite a while now. And because we were talking about UVA and the Cincinnati connection there, he's one of those coaches that left Xavier to go on to bigger pastures, not necessarily better, but that was when Xavier was in the MCC, and it was considered maybe not even a mid-major at that point. And then they moved to the Atlantic 10 for the Big East. So Xavier is now on the big board, one of the big 6 conferences as they refer to them, and that has made a big difference. And though that Big East might be a little quiet, there's, as you've said many times, top to bottom, they're probably packed as tight as any conference in the country.
Yeah, most people think they're going to have 6 or 7 bids into the NCAA when it's all said and done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very, very important. Just think about it where we are, Xavier fans, in the Big East. I did a little research, just kind of knew the overall, but I really crunched the numbers, so to speak. And I wasn't even around. You were in Cincinnati at the time. But, yeah, before 1979, the Musketeers were an independent and had played as an independent, hadn't been part of a league. Kind of an informal league. They played a lot of the Jesuit schools. Remember last year when we talked to Dale Harmon, they were playing Marquette and Notre Dame and Loyola. So there was kind of an affiliation there with the different Jesuit schools, which was kind of a league, but it wasn't a formal league where records were kept and championships were doled out. One of the big things that Bob Stack, of course, accomplished, first of all, is he got him into a conference. And, it actually was called the Mid-City Conference when it first formed in 1979. Xavier was a charter member of that. I actually became a Xavier fan around 84, 85, so they were well into that conference. But they were in that conference for 16 years, and, of course, that did them very well. And they got to a point where they became what people call the flagship of the conference, winning it many year in and year out. So I looked at it. Actually, they were in it for 16 years, and they were the regular season champ either by themselves or tied 8 of those 16 seasons. Of course, then they went to what they felt was a better, more competitive conference that would lead the program to more status and recognition. They went to the Atlantic 10. They entered the Atlantic 10 in 1995. And actually spent 19 seasons in the Atlantic 10. And of those 19 seasons, they were champions, regular season champions, 10 of those 19 seasons. So you could see in the first 2 conferences they were in, they were about, 500 of winning championships every year, regular season championships. And, of course, in both those leagues, there were times when they were actually the tournament champion getting the bid from the NCAA. And now, of course, this is the 5th season in the Big East, and we haven't won it at all. But, of course, again, we're talking about, as we do all the time, one of the top 5 leagues in the country. I mean, you look back, you go over I guess it would be, about a 40-year stretch, how far they've come. And you remember Dale Harmon last year saying that, that was right near the end of his tenure down at Xavier, that there was talk of dropping Division I basketball, as they had dropped football, and because of financial reasons, and there was talk that there was too much emphasis on the basketball, and financially to just maybe move to a Division III school would be the answer, take the focus off of athletics and basketball. Of course, thankfully the decision was not made to do that. They made the decision to go the complete different direction, to focus on basketball and Division I basketball, and to try to make it a big marketing tool for the university. And of course, over a 40-year stretch, they've done just that. In 1977, when you saw Xavier box scores, you always saw in parentheses after it Ohio, because of course there's another Xavier down in New Orleans, and they would had to distinguish. Oh well, they don't have to do that anymore. When you say Xavier and you're talking college basketball, everybody knows that it's the Musketeers, and most people know now that it is in Cincinnati, Ohio.
You know, a fantastic history, no doubt about it, NIT championship, and with that resurgence has come these runs in the NCAA and a spate of coaches. I mean, if you wanted to say there's a cradle of coaches right now, you could certainly point toward Xavier. You've got people moving out of here, you know, like Pete Gillen, like you say, he went to the Big East with Providence in its earlier situation, and then moved on to the ACC with Virginia. Bob Stack, you know, he was done after getting things done here, but Skip Prosser went to the ACC as well. Sean Miller went to the Pac-12. Thad Matta went up to Ohio State. So it just had a fantastic tradition for many, many years. You know, Chris Mack seems to be a different entity, Cincinnati area boy who probably could be our Mark Few unless somebody starts throwing a lot of money at him. But from what I understand, Georgetown did that last year, and that wasn't enough to get him out of here. So, but the points you hear, that's great. We've moved up to the bigger conference, and we talked about this earlier in the year, Jim, when the boards were lighting up. Was this the best Xavier team ever? And you and I think, we're pretty much on the same page. You can talk about it. One of two things: you can't really decide that until the season's over, and two, that season has to end with some sort of championship, and that's what's sort of holding them back in the Big East right now, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and the other advantage of being in the Big East, and last year really points to it, is I remember years when they were in the MCC, it was like if they didn't win the tournament, it was almost like they still had to have a superior season, something like a 25-3, to get that open bid to the NCAA. And now, being in a conference like the Big East, one of the advantages is you can finish. They finished 7th last year, I believe, in the actual standings at 9-9. But because of the quality of the league, they still got the bid to the NCAA and were able to make that run. So that's a key advantage of being in a league like this.
And what's neat too is, you know, we are at just the beginning of February, as we said, and they already have 20 wins with 8 games left to go. And then, of course, the tournament as well, both the Big East and then moving on. So, you know, looking at it, this could be a team that sets records. The record for season wins is 30, I believe. And
yes.
Check that. Yes, that's in 2008. Under Sean Miller, that team went 30-7, and they made an Elite 8 run. So eight games left. You would hope 3 or 4 games at least in the Big East tournament. That makes it 11 or 12, and then a run. So they could set records there as well. But you want them to also be, like I said, winning that championship, and we'll come back to that. Getting a little ahead of ourselves because that Villanova game is still 2 weeks away, and as you've often said, you kind of deviated from today, that you got to take them one at a time, and the next one is Georgetown and the Hoyas. And give a shout out to my old student, Chi-Ray Chang. We got our ice cream bet working again this year. She was very excited when University of Cincinnati left the Big East, which meant we didn't have to have our ice cream bet that she was consistently losing. But then when I reminded her I was also a Xavier grad, we've kept that going. So the Chi-Ray, we're on again. And I do like ice cream, so we'll go from there. We'll take the next one, and then Butler and Hinkle. Those are 2 games that we will talk about next week, and then be done with. And then we can go into that spate of games, which will be even tougher, at Creighton, hosting Seton Hall, and Villanova. That'll be on next week's Razor Cast on Thursday. And, of course, on Tuesday, hook us up for our Trog Cast, 2 really old guys, same 2 guys, so we just have different names for the cast, talking NCAA basketball, and that's fun. What else you got for us, Jim, before we turn on to our trivia and tidbits?
Well, I was just going to do, if you do a real quick math, if the Musketeers win out the regular season, win the Big East tournament, and win the national championships, I think they would end it at 37-3. That would probably be the best season in history. Would you not agree?
Definitely in Xavier history. There's no doubt about that. But again, this is where I got to pull back your race all season long when I didn't need to look ahead. It was one game at a time. Now you're looking into April. So we'll get past Georgetown. That would be fantastic, but I don't want to jinx it. Let's get win number 21 and 22, and we'll talk about those next week and move on from there.
Yeah, I was just having fun there. In fact, I've become very, very focused on the next game. I don't look too far ahead because, again, as we know in the Big East, you can lose to anybody on any given night. So you have to bring your best every night, or you will end up with a loss.
Yeah. Well, we have had, 8, 10? Oh, a bunch. I'd even more than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 NCAA appearances in a row. So we want to keep that going. And that includes the 3 Elite Eights. We want to get over into the Final Four. That would be fantastic.
Okay. There's one in there.
Just one
I think
in
12, 13 they didn't make it. They were only like 17 and 14. The last year.
That's right. They did miss out in 12 and 13. That's right.
Yeah, I think that was the last year in the
we'll take 13 out of 14.
We'll take 13 out of 14. March is not much fun if your favorite team's not in the big dance.
Yeah. All right. So what have you got for me today?
Well, we talked about leagues, and this is just going to be an educated guess on your part, but I'll fill in the holes after you take your educated guess. But can you name for me the season the Musketeers won their first league championship, and that would be regular season, ever?
Ever?
Ever.
Well, as you just said, it would have to be after 1979 when they got into the MCC. So, yes, well, you got another thing. I'll say they won that early, maybe not the first year, 81, 82 in there.
Missed it by a year. It was actually 1980 and 81 season. But here's the interesting thing about that. They actually won the league with an 8-3 record, was first place all by themselves. But
I remember they were under 500.
Yeah, and they didn't win the league tournament, so they did not go to the NCAA and actually finished with an overall record of 12-16. Mm-hmm. So again, that was a step along the way. First championship, regular season championship, they'd won in the league, but again, the season.
Well, you weren't here yet then, Jim, but I remember there was a lot of talk then about the mistake of going to a league, and Bob Stack's butt was very much on the line, even though they won, because he didn't have a winning season, I think, until his 4th or 5th year, but then he started cranking them out, and that's what sort of set up another series of coaches.
Yeah, and when I did arrive, again, they were in the MCC for quite a few years there, and I do remember, though, seemed like almost always they would go to that MCC tournament, and it was usually held in Indianapolis, and the thought was, they got to win this or they might not get a bid to the NCAA. I do remember, though, quite distinctly that the very last year they were in the MCC, they went undefeated in the league. I think they were 14-0, and they had one of those stellar, I think they were like 25-2 or 26-2 or something like that. And they actually went to the MCC tournament, which that year just happened to be held at Wright State. Wright State had just entered into the MCC, and of course they're still in the league. It's still the same league. It's changed its name. It's now the Horizon, and they still are one of the top teams in it. But that year was their first year in, and they actually drew a very low seed, having a so-so year moving up for them into a bigger league. But they actually upset the Musketeers in the very first round of the MCC that year. But fortunately, the Musketeers had such a good record that they got a at-large bid into the NCAA, despite not being able to finish out that season, their last season in the MCC, by not only going undefeated in the regular season, but winning the conference tournament, which they were kind of expected to do.
If I remember, that was Skip Prosser's first year, I believe.
Yeah, you're right. You are right. And then, of course, they did make this step up. If you look through the records, they made the step up to the Atlantic 10 and had a very young team. I remember Lenny Brown was on that team. But the next year, they were very, very young. I think they were starting at least three sophomores. And that first year in the Atlantic 10 was not a good one. They finished about 500 and didn't make the NCAA. But, of course, they readjusted their expectations, kind of like we're trying to do now with the Big East, and started to finish near the top. And again, of course, came out with those 10 regular season championships before they left the league to move to the Big East.
And, of course, that was also the beginning of the two division. You know, they call it now it's the Atlantic 10 plus 4, like it's the Big 10 plus 4. Not really a 10, but they play the two divisions and don't have all necessarily the home and homes and all those things that you've got. So fantastic history to Xavier basketball, going all the way back to 1919 with Harry Gilligan in the one game that he coached and unfortunately lost that year. One of the few.
Was that against the Bearcats?
That I don't know. I don't believe so. I don't believe that.
That'd be an interesting. That'd be, for all we know, back then it could have been against Mount St. Joe or something.
Yeah, I would say I don't think the. Again, let me see what I got here. It's first game was played. That first game on record was a Joe Meyer game, but they've got Harry Gilligan down. We'll have to look that up and see what we can come up with. See what the very first game was. I'm sure it's in the archives somewhere.
Think about the pressure there. You are a coach of a team, and your season is one game. That's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And they lost that game, right?
They lost it, but again, this time it was. It wasn't what it is today. It was more something like we talked about on the Trogcast a few weeks ago. The game was just invented by Dr. Naismith as something to keep kids at the YMCA busy during the winter months when they couldn't go outside. So it wasn't quite the same as it was. It was more of a PE game, keeping people busy, and the interscholastic, intercollegiate stuff came much later. Of course, today it's one of the biggest businesses, sports businesses at least, in the United
Today
States.
It's a game to keep old guys busy during the winter, something to
That's
watch and talk about.
Yeah, something to do and to sell cars and erectile dysfunction pills and things like that. Well, let's get to a couple of tidbits, though. It's Oscar month anyway. Well, it used to be. Now the awards have been moved back to March. They used to give them, like March Madness has been moved back to April, but nevertheless, I'm going to give a shout-out to Kobe Bryant, who has been nominated in the animated short category for his collaboration on the creation of the cartoon version of his Dear Basketball letter that he sent out when he retired a few weeks ago. And that got me to think about sports movies and Oscars, and specifically basketball movies. So there have been dozens of entertaining movies about basketball. You think of the Fish That Saved Pittsburgh, or White Men Can't Jump, Blue Chip, He Got Game, Love and Basketball, Hoosiers, Space Jam. There's also been a few forgettable ones like Jabberwocky, The Air Up There, One-on-One, Teen Wolf, and Kung Fu Dunk. And a pinch of high school-related ones like Finding Forrester, Hoop Dreams, Coach Carter, The Winning Season. I really put that in more. That should be more in the forgettable category, that last one. But if you watch it, it's very entertaining, turned by this year's Best Supporting Actor nominee for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Dakota, Sam Rockwell. It's very formulaic on the coach is down on his luck that the kids change him to, but Sam Rockwell's always entertaining. But I was surprised to find there's only been 2 Academy Award nominations for basketball-related movies. Of course, this wasn't in-depth research. I haven't called the Academy or anything. Have any idea who they are, Jim? I mean, it's not a trivia question, just to see if your knowledge.
I would
one
say
of them, they probably get one.
One of them has to be Hoosiers, right?
Well, Hoosiers, not the movie, but Dennis Hopper did get a Best Supporting Actor nomination for Shooter as the assistant coach in Hoosiers. And the other one is for a documentary. So if you think of basketball documentaries, what's the first one that comes to mind?
I can't think of the name of it.
Chicago.
Oh, that wasn't what it was. Oh, that's where it was? That wasn't a name, but
well, that's
give it to me.
Based on Hoop Dreams in the 1990s. about two.
Well, you talk about one of the things I see when you see these little bios on college basketball players, time and time again, I've never watched a movie. In fact, I think it's a cartoon. You may know better. Is Space Jam. A lot of college basketball players mark that as their favorite movie.
Oh, it's hilarious! You got to watch it. It's a mix of Looney Tunes cartoons and live action basketball, and it's everything you remember about the Looney Tunes cartoons you watched on Saturday morning and modern animation. Do that, but no nominations there. So just the two. Hoop Dreams was nominated for Best Editing in a feature-length documentary. Now, this led me to say, if there's only two, how do you get a nomination for a sports movie? What sport do you think is the easiest one to get an Academy Award nomination for?
What sport is it easiest to get an Academy?
There have been 11
movies on this sport.
No, there have been 11 different
nominations.
Sports that have been nominated.
Oh, okay.
And this one rules supreme.
That's a good question. You really, I almost, but that can't be right. I guess.
Go with your first guess.
I was just going to say wrestling. I know that there's been a couple with wrestling, but.
That's not a bad guess because there have been a couple of wrestling ones lately. The wrestler with, his name is escaping me now. But Marissa Tomei was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Mickey Rourke was nominated for Best Actor, and Foxcatcher a few years ago, where Steve Carell and Mark Ruffalo were nominated for acting awards. But actually, and you'll kick yourself in, it's boxing.
Yeah, my next guess would have been baseball or football.
Yeah, well, there have been 11 sports total. Other than boxing, 24 movies have gotten nominations. Boxing movies have gotten 12. Non-boxing nominations, 95. Boxing nominations in half the movies, 47. So wins, non-boxing movies, 14. Boxing movies, 13. When it comes to Best Actor nominations, all the other sports combined, just 10 nominations with 2 wins, whereas in boxing, 10 nominations with 3 wins in the Best Actor or Actress. And in supporting, non-boxing sports, 16 nominations, just 2 wins, whereas in boxing, they've had 10 nominations and 3 wins. So if you want to get an Academy Award for sport, become a boxer, I guess, is the way to go at it. It's probably better than actually trying to make money boxing and getting your brain turned into guava jelly. So,
well, now that I think about it, I guess all the Rockies probably had a few of those.
Well, I can run down for you. Right? The first one was The Champ in 1931, Wallace Beery winning Best Actor. Somebody Up There Likes Me with Paul Newman as Rocky Graziano. 1970, The Great White Hope, fantastic movie about race and boxing. James Earl Jones was nominated for Best Actor, and I should have kept this up, but fantastic actress. Her face, you can see her, was nominated for Best Actress. That'll come to me. Rocky, of course, the big one, 10 nominations in 1976, 3 wins, but none of them for acting. Raging Bull, where Robert De Niro won the Best Acting Award. Rocky III got one nom. The Hurricane with Denzel Washington, he was nominated for Best Actor in that. Ali with Will Smith, he got the Best Actor nom. And there's also Best Supporting Actor nomination in there for John Voight's Howard Cosell. Even Real Steel, I had to count that as a boxing movie. It's a terrible movie, but it did get an Oscar nomination for effects. That's the one where the Rock'em Sock'em robot basically goes in and crushes people in the ring. $1 Million Baby won Best Actress for Hilary Swank and Best Supporting Actor for Morgan Freeman. Then The Fighter won the Best Supporting Actor for Christian Bale and the Best Supporting Actress for Melissa Leo. And then Creed got Sylvester Stallone a nomination. In fact, in sports movies, it's interesting to see the only 2 people to ever be nominated for the same role twice, I believe, were in sports movie, and that's Sylvester Stallone. He's been nominated for playing Rocky Balboa twice, once as Best Actor in the original and then as Best Supporting Actor in Creed. And then Paul Newman was nominated for Fast Eddie Felson twice. the original, The Hustler, and then he won for The Color of Money. But it's time to go out and watch all the movies as the Oscars will wind up, and I believe it's March 4th when they have their award ceremony. But before that, we got lots of basketball left. Again, join us on Tuesday for our Trogcast for all things Xavier basketball, NCAA basketball, and then again on Thursday for our Razorcast for all things Muskie basketball. We wish the Muskies all the best of luck against the Hoyas on Saturday and against the Bulldogs on Tuesday. We'll be talking about that next Thursday as well. And until then, we say,
go Muskies.